sail ships. And my favorite was the Cutty Sark. And it was built in 1869 in England. And the name of it, Cutty Sark, is the name of a witch. And the masthead, which is it's just like a big carving of a face, and part of the person on there too. And so I sat there with a magnifying glass and painted the face of that witch, and it's a nice looking face. And the witches, you think of Halloween witches, that they're ugly. But there was witches that were like an ordinary person. And that's what they used for the mastheads on there, for it's a decoration for the ship. And then when the ship was built for the tea trade between England and China and Australia and those countries in the east, because there must have been a big trade in tea. And it was one of the fastest all-sail ships that was ever built. And I always liked the shape of the hull. It's got such beautiful lines. And whoever that designed this must really been a good designer. So then you start building, and first of all, you build the hull, and then the masts. These are the masts. Up and down that hold the sails and all that. You put them in. And then these cross pieces here, they're called yard arms. And then you start putting in the lines. They're actually ropes, but the nautical term is lines. It's not ropes. So then you start putting in all the lines to brace these masts up from here, from the tip of the mast all the way across, and then it comes down again. And they're tied on to pins. That's what they call them, pins. So each mast has to be braced like that. And it also has to be braced sideways. So these, it looked like ladders here. They're rope. They're tied like sort of almost like a net. That's the main brace for holding the masts sideways. And then there's many pulleys that you have to tie onto these yard arms. So when they raise the sails, they go up on the yard arms, all the sails on them. They pull them up with these lines, and they got a rack along the bottom or on top of the hull with big pins. I just call them belaying pins. And what it did was to hold the masts and brace them up. And they're black, and the reason they're black is they painted them with tar to preserve them in the salt water and that. And then the lines that are used to pull the sails up, they're a brown color. And they're the ones that, when the sails are rolled up on each yard arm, these cross pieces, and when they pull them up, then the sailors go up there and tie them down on each yard arm, so they crawled way up on the top of this mast. to tie them down. And then when they set sail again, then you have to untie them and they drop them down. Then the ropes or the lines hold them. Then they tie the lines down on these big pins. That's what holds the sails when they're sailing. And then there's many little small parts that you have to put in. Like there's a cabin in there. There's a machinery to raise the anchor. The anchor hangs by a little chain on the side. So when they drop the anchor, they got a big, like a windlass, I call it, and they turn around by hand with big pins on the end to raise the anchor up. And then the steering mechanism is back on the stern, which is the back end of the ship. There's a little wheel back. There's a little wheel, steering wheel is called it, is that they use there with big wheel with pins on the end that they use to steer the. And the reason is back here because it's close to the rudder back here that steers the ship. And this rudder on the real ship would probably be about 40 feet high and maybe about at least 10 feet wide. And there's chains that go from this wheel up here that come down and hook onto the rudder down back there. So whoever is steering stands back here. And they also had a compass back there they used for navigation, which they didn't have much of that in those days. And then you build these tiny lifeboats they can see here, and they're hanging from a mechanism, they call it davits. And if they have to lower it, they can swing them down, and these lifeboats are fastened on lines, and they can drop them into the water. So they're kind of moved at different parts of the ship. Then there's covers. The inside of the ship is called the hold, and where the cargo is dropped down through these little cargo covers. And there's like a little crane back here or something that you can pick stuff up and move it and raise it up and down when they're loading the ship. So all the cargo has to go through these little cargo into the cargo departments. So you can imagine how it was loaded up with tea. And you can imagine the pressure from the wind and sailing there would be on top of the ship. So how do you keep that from capsizing, from rolling over? They had to have ballast. In the bottom of the ship, there's a keel down there that sticks down, and they have to have ballast besides the cargo, because if they're sailing empty, they got to have a ballast. If they didn't have it, the bottom of the way, the first thing in the bottom of the hull is the ballast. And what they used in those days, they used huge stones, rocks, huge rocks in the bottom of the ship to stabilize it so it would stay upright. Otherwise, right in there, the pressure from the wind was so great on top that the ship would probably just capsize. So they had to have that because when they went and loaded the cargo, and possibly they'd go back, maybe there wasn't much cargo in there, pick up another load, they had to have that ballast in there. And sometimes when they're looking for shipwrecks, and you see that once in a while, they find a shipwreck, and what they probably see first is a big pile of rocks, and a big pile. That's an indicator that there was a ship sunk there. And it probably is one of the last shale ships built, because the steamships started coming in, and they were faster. So the sail ships probably were used for probably many years later, but the main cargo ships and passenger ships were steam. And when my ancestors came from Norway back in the 1800s, it was kind of a style of ship was just like this, that they traveled from Europe to America. Would be a sail ship. So there would probably be days when there was no wind at all. They'd probably be just drifting. They just have to wait till they picked up wind again. So it would take probably a few months in order to cross the Atlantic. So one year, probably back in the 60s or 70s, he gave me this model kit for my birthday. And I started building it. It took many hours to build it, but I enjoyed all of it because I just liked to sit and put these lines in, and then the painting on it, the stripes on the side, you have to tape it and paint the hull and paint the stripes with a small brush. And all these little pieces that are painted are painted on with small brushes. And the bottom of the ship looked like copper colored. And the reason it looked like it's copper colored, because at that time they were putting copper plates on the hull that was below the water line. And they copper, when it was new, was just shiny copper. After it'd been in the salt water for a while, it started turning kind of like a dull green. It changed to a dull green. And so I left it.